We're going to take you on a little historic journey down past the Union Church and Cemetery. I have with me today Henry Williams, who's the president of the Union Society. I am also a member, and we are responsible for taking care of the church, and we are one of the trustees that have been caring for this church ever since it originated back in 1853. So I think probably it is one of the most photographed churches in this whole area. I had the pleasure of living across the street from it for about 47 years, and many times when I would go out, I would see people taking pictures of it or artists with their easels drawing photographs of it. The cemetery is a very old one, unique. The oldest part of the cemetery, to the left of the church, is probably the oldest tombstone, I believe, is 1777. And some of the tombstones, you really can't read the inscriptions on them any longer, which is why my husband decided to map the cemetery. And he has a book he mapped all of the cemeteries in the town. And the Union Cemetery was the first one. It took him about a year to do it. And there are some pictures here. One is the William Savory Monument, which is on Monument Row. And these are some of the old tombstones that can barely still be read. Monument Row is there are tombstones there and monuments to the iron industries great people in South Carver. And as we go down the row, there are, first of all, these are the great blast furnace men and the iron masters. There was an iron foundry in South Carver, and William Savory, who was one of the founders of the church, and also Jesse Murdoch, are buried in the cemetery. And William Murdoch, who lived on the hill and grew up right next to where the Old South Meeting House was, wrote something about the cemetery in Monument Row. And I'd like to read a few little comments that he made about these men. He was a very prolific writer. He wrote several letters to friends in Carver. And without these wonderful stories and memories that he have, we would have lost a very important history. This first article is about the row itself and the men. The Carver's great blast furnace men, some of its greatest iron masters, are buried in Monument Row, a row of monuments that extends north and south through the center of the cemetery and which time has made famous. The row was not deliberately planned. It just grew that way over a period of many years. We will stroll along Monument Row as I have done so many times in past years, and while doing so, I will tell you briefly whom each one represents. Not all of those monuments represent blast furnace men, but they all represent men who were famous in Carver in their day. The first monument that we come to at the north end of Row was a Bent, and he was very much involved in many ways in the iron business in town. The third monument in the row is a granite shaft upon a paneled pedestal. Paneled in the base block is the name Murdoch. Here is buried my grandfather, Ira. For a number of years, he was associated with the operators of the Federal Blast Furnace, not only at the furnace, but he used to go as supercargo on vessels sailing from Wareham with Carver Blast Furnace product to trade it for merchandise for home consumption. The fourth monument consists of a tall, round, beaded granite shaft standing upon a granite pedestal that has marble tablets inserted into its four sides, and all standing upon two solid base blocks. The monument bears the name of Jenkins. Whenever I visit here, I always pause at each monument with respect and retrospect. At this monument, I can always see a little white-haired man sitting at his desk in his office beneath the stairway of the old shoestring factory. That was on Federal Furnace Road in South Carver, near where the Shady Acres campground is to this day, and just about opposite where the entrance to Mayflower Road. The little white-haired man is buried in Monument Row in company with blast furnace men. He had the love and respect of all who knew him. The grandest of the old iron men is John Savory, who received his early training in the heat and the smoke, the glare and the din of Carver blast furnaces. He made his financial start in life by contracting to extract iron ore from Sampson's Pond, established iron industries in Albany, New York, New Jersey City, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and became one of the leading foundry men of his day. His monument, the fifth in the row, is of white marble upon a granite base. The pedestal is proportionately tall, bears the inscriptions and a strange device, and is surmounted by a fluted broken shaft or column. This type of monument was frequently used in late colonial and early national days, but like all types of monuments, it is seldom used now. The next monument also bears the name Savory, William Savory, son of John Savory, another one of Carver's prominent iron masters. He was one of the proprietors, the first proprietors of the Union Church, and also Jesse Murdoch was. He was a very important man in Carver. He contributed books to the library of all the schools in town, the school bell in South Carver, and contributed a great deal of financial aid to the beginnings of the Union Society, as well as Jesse Murdoch. The Union Society evolved because at the time the old South Meeting House, which is to the left of Mayflower Road, when that began to deteriorate, after being used for church meetings, the militia trained there. They had town meetings there in the south part of town, and when that building began to deteriorate, William Savory and Jesse Murdoch and other men in South Carver decided that they would build the Union Church. And from the beginning, it was, they had in their bylaws that it was to be non-denominational. And the very first service in the church indicated that by having ministers from Congregational Church, Universalist Church, Methodist Church, and the Baptist Church. And it has kept this tradition from that day to this. They had services mostly in the summer and the spring months. The church was heated back in those days by a wood stove and then a coal furnace. And today it is unheated and it has no electricity. But we still hold services in the summer. For years there were 4 services in the summer, and now there are only 1. Hopefully maybe we'll get back to 2 in the future. But there are weddings there, we have weddings there, we have memorial services, funerals, and we try to keep it as active as possible. Henry is the president, and he has been sort of the director in charge of repairs of the last few years. For a long time it was my husband, and since he's been gone, Henry Williams has been our guiding light to keep the church up. And he's been in charge of our drives that we have to raise money for repairs. And Henry, how did you first become interested in the church?
Well, I've always lived in Carver, so I've always seen the church, and I've always had a great interest in architecture, and especially historic architecture. And I thought it was something that I could actually help, some way I could help, and that would be to preserve that building and that church, because it is unique, it is important to the town.
It is. It's one of the well, it's a wonderful example of the Gothic, the rural Gothic architecture, and to me, it's important to keep it in good repair because it is such a landmark.
Right, and if anyone who owns an old house knows that a wood building like that is constant repairs. As soon as we do one thing, we start another, and already we're back to painting the trim and the outside again. So it's constant. But it's something I like doing, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be doing it. But it's not something I do alone. Everybody helps. And it's a joint effort. And it's something we take a great deal of pride in.
Yes. I don't know how many members we have at present.
I don't either, but active members are only a few. And with a building like that, because we aren't year-round, we don't have a full-time minister. So our money sources are limited. In other words, we can't go to the town and ask for money. You can get help from the state and federal government, but the guidelines are very strict. We've sought that avenue before. And when it comes time for people to give money, there are many causes out there. And where we're only to many, just a part-time church, it doesn't offer rank high in priorities. And that's unfortunate because that church is part of the character of the town. And if you lose little bits like that, you're losing part of the history and the character of the town. So we urge people to give, but we know it's difficult and that people have their own church they go to. But people, in the past few years, have been very generous. We've been very lucky.
Yes, we have.
Yes.
We have. Let's take a little tour of the church now. We've been to the cemetery and talked a little about the men who lived back in the days of the church, the beginning of the church.
Right.
And as we go into the foyer, there is a box on the post. When we do have church services, we don't have a collection, as most churches do, but that little box in the entryway is a place for people, if they want to leave a donation, they can do so. We have just had the church painted, so now is a good time for people to come and see it. If they've wanted to come and look at the inside of the church, now is a good time for people to come there and see how it looks since it's been done
right.
over.
And it does look quite nice now. Going
Yeah.
back to that box, we call it the miter box. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and that's an Old English term for alms or donation.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody finds it quite odd that we don't we don't have an offering, just the miter box.
Mm.
But it's the tradition of the church. We have
Yes.
a lot of odd traditions, but we're going to stick to them as part of our
Yes.
church.
Yes. Back in the early days, the church was considered to be very forward, outstanding, in different, because there were very, very few non-denominational churches. And I think we were the Union Church was one of the first
Yes.
non-denominational churches.
Yes.
We used to like to say we were the first, but I think there was one out in the Midwest that might have been the first.
Right. Well, even the design of the church, when it was built, they considered it the modern style. And in 1854, that was considered the modern style. And I don't know whether they mean the layout inside, but I remember seeing that quote. From early on, it has been new and cutting edge.
Yes. Mm. We're now going to take a little break, and we will be right back.
Every year, almost 14,000 women in our country die from ovarian cancer.
It can strike a woman of any age. My wife was only 36.
Unfortunately, symptoms are often subtle and hard to identify.
But if detected early, ovarian cancer is usually treatable.
Talk to your wife about ovarian cancer, because if you think it's just a women's issue, you're wrong.
As husbands, we have all felt its pain.
We were talking about the foyer of the church, and as you walk in on the right-hand side, there is a bronze plaque. And Henry, would you tell us a little about that plaque?
We had to start a major fundraising campaign, and the idea came up that people often like to see their name in writing. So we decided that perhaps a plaque for a certain amount of money, donations of a certain amount of money, people could have their names on this plaque. First time we've ever done this, and we did a campaign, and we did very well in raising monies.
And we're very grateful to people for all the donations. Without them, we never would be able to keep that church up and have it looking as nice as it is today.
Right. The monies don't go far, as everyone knows. Nowadays things cost so much, so that before we could paint the walls, fix the ceiling, a new roof, fix the steeple because it was only on 3 legs. So before we could do any of these things, we had to go back and start repairing one thing first, and then the second, and then the third, because we'd had major leaks and the ceiling was falling down. So first we do the steeple, then we do a roof, then we fixed the ceiling, which alone was a major task only because it's a vaulted ceiling and the pews are fixed in the floor. So when it came time to work at the ceiling, which is probably 25 feet up, they had to erect staging, put it in place, and they couldn't move it. Now the building isn't heated, so we couldn't do it during the winter. It has no electricity, so they couldn't use a lot of power tools. So first step was we did the ceiling, got that finished, and then secondly was what we've done most recently is paint the walls and the trim in the vestibule. Over the years, styles have changed and colors have changed, and it was built during the Victorian times. No one knows exactly what the colors were, but while the plaster was working on the ceiling, he said, "Come up on the stage and climb on the stage and look at this ceiling." So I climbed up the stage and looked at the ceiling. He said, "This ceiling was pink." And I said, "What?" He said, "The paint underneath was pink," and it was pink. Which gave us the idea that perhaps if the ceiling was pink, the walls couldn't have been the putty yellow they were. So that perhaps they were a rose color, or perhaps they were a mauve color, or something like that, which gave us the idea to the current repainting that we did it in the supposed to be a faded rose color, bringing it back towards more Victorian times.
Getting back to the foyer, to the right there are two doors. One is a storage closet, and the other one is a door that originally went upstairs. And it is blocked off now. To the left is another door which goes upstairs. And as you go upstairs, up there is an organ. Now, when the church was first built, for the dedication, for the opening, William Savory and Jesse Murdoch donated the bell for the church, and also a reed organ, which was placed up there. And that old organ served well for many, many years. My sister played the organ, my mother played the organ, and I did some solo work up there. I sang a good many times. The acoustics are wonderful from up there, as we've heard other musicians over the years.
Definitely.
It was a lot of fun to sing up there. And that old organ, you had to work. It was an old pump organ, and you really had to work to get the sound to come out of it.
Especially towards the latter years when it was leaking.
Oh, yes, yes.
And you could hear them pumping away. And sometimes in the service, in the summertime, the temperature approaches 85, 90 in there.
Yes.
And in the balcony, it's even warmer. And we used to think, oh, please, let's not lose an organist today. Because they would be sweating away up there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And the bell, when there are weddings there or services, the youngsters love to ring that bell. They ride up and down on that bell, and they just love that. When I was living across the street and there were weddings, the bell would just keep on ringing and ringing and ringing. On big occasions, we would go over and ring the bell. In 1976, during the bicentennial, my mother-in-law lived in the Larches across the street, and there were a big family gathering. And at a certain time of the day, we all went over, and the children, 3 or 4 of the children, took turns ringing the bell. And then on 9 and 11, we went over and rang the bell.
Yes, on the anniversary of it, yes.
In the anniversary of it.
Yes.
So the bell has stood up remarkably well.
Right.
It's amazing how it has stood up over the years. While we're up there looking down at the pulpit and the seats below and the windows, it gives you a very good view of the church from up in the balcony. And downstairs, as you enter the church, the main part of the church, you can really see the color and the change, the rose color, and it really is beautiful. And also, there are 3 paintings up over the pulpit.
Yeah, the mysterious paintings
Yes.
over the pulpit. What's your version? My version, I was told, is that it's faith, hope, and charity. Could be.
That could be. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah?
But of course, the anchor, it has also been said that represents Christ, the fisherman, the
Okay.
anchor, and also a steady, strong faith.
Yes.
A strong faith, and then of course the Bible.
Yes.
But we believe that they were painted by the same artists who were brought over from Italy and did all the paintings, the mural work at the Leyden Cottage, William Savory's home. And I believe that he had them come over and do those paintings.
I would think so, because it's amazing that they're both built at the same time. And obviously William Savory's influence is pretty evident there. Recently when I toured the Savory home again, I was looking for more ideas, because at one point there was a wide band, 8 inches wide, going all the way across the room, and trying to figure out what was it or how it was. And then I got the idea, going back to the Savory house, that if the same person's painted it, it was probably a lot like this. So if we ever come to the point where we're going to paint that band, I think we just go to the Savory house, get some ideas,
Yes.
and that could tell us how to paint that band back. Because when you go in the Savory house, architecturally, it's similar in the door surrounds and the window surrounds and everything are so much. In fact, the faux bois, the wood painting, wood graining, was very popular during the Victorian times, and that was all throughout the Savory house. And we have a great deal of it in the church of wood graining. Some of it quite nice,
Yes.
especially on the end of the pews.
Yes.
Whether those are pieces of burl or whether they're fan or flame or whatever they are, we don't know. But in the end of every single pew, there's one of these paintings. So there's an extensive painting done in the church when it was done, and probably by the same people who did the Savory house.
Yes. My father-in-law, at one time when the church was painted, when they painted the wall up behind the pulpit, he painted around those paintings. It takes a lot of work to paint around each one of those things and not obliterate any of the original painting.
Right.
So he was quite artistic, and so he did that. And then the pews, when the church was built, it was built on the pew plan. And that they raised money for the church by every person who belonged to the church bought a pew. And there's an indication of we have some deeds, some old deeds still that show the purchase of the pews. William Savory's pew still has I believe it's a silver
Yes.
plaque
It's either silver or nickel. I'm not sure
Or
what
nickel?
it is. Yes.
right at the end of the pew. That was their family pew, and that's where they sat. My in-laws did not have a deeded pew, but they sat always in pew number 7. The pews are all numbered, and they always sat in that pew number 7, way over on the right-hand side. To this day, the family sits there. So, which I find very interesting.
When we were painting the walls, we also had the 3 murals in the behind the pulpit, so, in a 18 karat gold. We had them surrounded in 18 karat gold to make them stand out a little bit more, just so that, and they really do now stand out
Yes.
quite well.
Yes.
They are old though. When the painter was up there, he said he was so afraid of touching it because the paint is actually flaking off the wall
Really?
now.
Yes.
Yeah, he was so afraid to work around them. Yes.
Looking from the pulpit down towards the pews and where the congregation sits, it's very interesting to see the outline of so many backs, which were caused by people perspiring during the hot summers. And I had thought that they were all very old, but as you can testify, they're not.
No, it happened to me a couple of years ago, one of those hot days. And I got home and there was a stain on the back of my jacket. I couldn't figure it out, and I realized, oh my God, it was the pews.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you can actually see the spine, the outline of the spines
Yeah.
on the backs of the pews. It's almost though you have an invisible congregation sitting out
Right.
there. Particularly when I'm alone in the church and I stand up there and look at them. It's really interesting. My one year around Christmas time in 1970, my husband went by the church and he saw a note on the door. So he stopped and he read it, and it was a note, a postcard from a woman from Norwell who was passing through, maybe going to Edaville, and it said, "I'm such a pretty church. Why don't you have me all lighted up at Christmas time?" So a couple of years later, after the church voted to have it, to have the church lighted, he wrote a poem and to send to this lady. She got a big kick out of it, and she sent him a letter after that, thanking, saying, "I'm glad that you lit the church, and I went by it, I saw it, and it was just so pretty. Thank you so much for doing that." So that was neat, and so it's been lit every Christmas ever since
The
then.
lights were put on last night, and they're on a timer, so they go on around 4 o'clock and shut off at 11.
We are going, ever since the Christmas after 9/11, we have had a candlelight service in the church, and we're having another one on December 12th, Sunday, December 12th at 4 o'clock. And we welcome everyone to come and join us.